No one should have to risk their health and possibly their life to exercise their constitutional right to vote. I hope we can all agree with that statement. And yet that's exactly what we saw on April 7th of this year, when Wisconsinites were forced to vote in person in their primary election, standing for hours in lines that stretched for miles. In the middle of a deadly health pandemic, American citizens, young and old, were denied the ability to vote by mail and were forced to leave the safety of their homes to vote in person. Despite the best efforts of elections officials, thousands of voters who requested absentee ballots did not receive them in time to vote and return them by election day. They were effectively disenfranchised. In the aftermath of Wisconsin's election, it has become clear that the health concerns of forcing people into in-person voting during a pandemic are all too real. An analysis by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services found that at least 71 people contracted the COVID-19 virus after voting in person or working at the polls at the April election. So once again, voters should not have to risk their health and possibly their life in order to exercise their constitutional right to vote. This is why I've introduced AB 860, which would require that every registered California voter be mailed a ballot for this November's general election. This will ensure that every California voter has the ability to vote from the safety of their own home. Unfortunately, opponents of this bill have argued that we are proposing to mail ballots to inactive voters. This obviously is not true. Elections Code Section 2226 clearly provides that inactive voters do not receive election materials, which includes ballots. Furthermore, the language of this bill is modeled after language in existing law that governs elections conducted under the Voters' Choice Act, mailed ballot elections, and all mail ballot precincts. None of those laws have been interpreted to require mailing ballots to inactive voters. So even though I feel a little bit silly having to emphasize that this bill clearly requires ballots to be mailed only to active registered voters, I wanted to make that point especially clear on the record to help dispel the rumors that are being perpetuated by groups and individuals who seek to undermine Californians' faith in the integrity of our elections. I also want to emphasize that AB 860 would not eliminate in-person voting opportunities. Californians will need safe in-person voting locations this November because they never received a ballot, they lost or damaged their ballot, they need language or voting assistance, or they need to register to vote. So I want to thank Chair Umberg for his leadership in authoring SB 423, the bill that I am proud to jointly author, to ensure that safe and healthy in-person voting options are available so that all voters have the ability to vote privately and independently. Finally, AB 860 makes a number of other important accommodations to help facilitate the expected surge in voting by mail at this November's election. It allows counties to begin processing returned vote-by-mail ballots earlier so that they can better manage their workloads and get more ballots counted on election night. And extends the deadline for receipt of vote-by-mail ballots so that voters are not disenfranchised by any potential postal service delays. It allows all voters to take advantage of the flexibility offered by remote accessible vote-by-mail systems, which can be especially helpful for voters who need replacement ballots or who want to receive a ballot in their preferred language. Finally, AB 860 would ensure that all California voters have the ability to track their ballots as they move through the mail system and are processed by elections officials. Before I conclude, I would be remiss if I didn't address a point that was brought up in a letter of opposition to this bill. In its opposition letter, the Election Integrity Project states, and I quote, "It is understandable to look to the vote-by-mail process to protect the rights of voters to participate in an election without jeopardizing their health or safety in a time of pandemic threat. But to maintain electoral integrity, there must be extra effort expended to assure the voters that the cure is not more lethal than the disease." I find that argument to be incredibly offensive and in poor taste. Voting by mail has never caused anyone's hospitalization or death. But given the COVID-19 health pandemic and uncertainty about whether or not there will be a surge in cases right before the general election, there is a very real chance that a lack of access to voting by mail, thereby forcing voters into crowded polling booths, will result in both hospitalization and death. While I have disagreed with this organization on policy matters in the past, I think that argument is beyond the pale. AB AB 860 is supported by a long list of organizations representing diverse communities, including the League of Women Voters of California, the California Labor Federation, the California Environmental Justice Alliance, and the California League of Conservation Voters, as well as by Secretary of State Alex Padilla. Thank you, members, for your consideration. Thank you, senators, for your consideration. And I respectfully ask for your aye vote